Dr. Nathan Reyes hadn't slept in 20 hours, had a deepening bruise along his ribs from an earlier scuffle with a territorial tree lurker, and now, to top it all off, one of the predator cubs was chewing on the hem of his shirt again. Yeah, you're adorable. Still have talons, he muttered, prying the tiny jaw loose with 2 fingers and half a wince. The cub gave a chirping snarl that, to Reyes, sounded dangerously close to a purr. That worried him more than he liked to admit. Officially, these creatures weren't even supposed to be here. Unclassified, no registry tags, no genetic mapping. Just 2 half-starved balls of claws, an instinct he'd found during a survey sweep in Sector 9B, buried beneath foliage and next to the remains of a collapsed den. They should have been logged, quarantined, handed over to xenogenetics. Instead, he'd snuck them in through the maintenance tunnel beneath the arboretum, stitched up their wounds himself, and set up an off-record containment pod in his lab's warm zone. Stupid? Probably. Against protocol? Absolutely. But when they'd stopped hissing long enough to curl up beside his leg on day 3, he figured the risk was worth it. Now, deep in the biodome at the edge of the academy campus, Reyes gently lifted the second cub from the nutrient basin, wiped its muzzle clean with a towel, and checked its vitals. Heart rate, slightly elevated. Respiration, stable. It blinked sleepily, still groggy from the earlier round of antibiotics. Its sibling yawned and rolled onto its back in a patch of filtered sunlight, exposing its speckled underbelly. He exhaled, still healthy, still manageable, barely. Then the alarms went off. They weren't the usual zone breach alarms. These were full spectrum, echoed across the academy's intercom with a tone so sharp it rattled glass. Containment failure. Level 7. Subject Korzun is mobile. All personnel evacuate. Repeat. Subject Korzun is mobile. Reyes froze, towel still in hand, heart suddenly punching at his ribs from the inside. Korzun wasn't just any containment subject. That thing wasn't even a thing, it was a relic from the Crotal War, a predator bio designed to tear through hull steel and make armored squads look underdressed. And now, it was loose. A moment later, his comms pinged with priority override. Target is moving. Path is linear. Current trajectory, Biodome 3. Estimated arrival, 4 minutes. Reyes looked down at the cubs nestled beside his feet, one blinking up at him with disarming trust. Of course it's coming here, he whispered. And for the first time since arriving at Zalith Academy, he wasn't sure if the universe was about to punish him or prove him right. 3 weeks earlier, Reyes had stood in front of the Field Ethics Council after returning from 9B, a sterile conference room filled with skeptical eyes and tentacle-laced advisors. No, he'd said, arms crossed, voice flat. I'm not handing them over until I finish observation. They're stable, non-aggressive, and we don't even know if they're sentient yet. An Atrelian moderator clicked a tablet's edge in mild agitation. Unclassified apex fauna are by regulation to be surrendered for security evaluation. That is not negotiable. They were dying, Reyes said. You want to interrogate me about my moral lapse? Go ahead. But I won't let you dissect infants because their gene map makes you nervous. This is irrational, dangerous, emotional. Thanks, I'm human. The council had eventually dropped the case on paper, anyway, but he'd felt the eyes on him ever since. The cubs whined, reacting to the sirens, pacing in the soft grass of the biodome's artificial terrain. Reyes's ribs pulsed as he crouched, clutching his side. He hadn't had time to return to medical after the tree lurker encounter. The gash was stitched, yes, but it ached deeper than it should. Bruising, maybe. He hadn't gotten imaging. That was stupid. Okay, he whispered, reaching for the emergency override panel inside the Arboretum's southern bulkhead. We're gonna do something stupid now. The dome had no weapons, no containment fail-safes, not for something like Korzun. The predator was supposed to be neutralized, its synaptic aggression pathways surgically dampened, the war programming erased after capture during the ceasefire. For 2 years, it hadn't even twitched under sedation. And now, it was awake, mobile, hunting. Except, it wasn't hunting. Not randomly. It was coming here. The cubs yelped again, crouching low and staring at the sealed dome hatch. Reyes's blood ran cold. 2 minutes later, across the campus, Tactical Supervisor Harnum watched in disbelief as the tracking monitors blinked in linear unison. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. Korzun bypassed evac corridors Alpha through Delta, ignored exposed targets in the observation mezzanine. Her junior, a Sorkian cadet named Till, squinted at the real-time telemetry. "It's heading for the environmental wing, the biodomes." Harnum narrowed her eyes. "Why?" "No clue. It's not acting like it did in simulations. It's focused." Another blip. Then another. "Biodome 3, Till confirmed." Harnum opened a secondary feed. Visuals from corridor cams showed blurred footage of 10 tons of bioweapon muscle crashing through composite barriers without pause. Doors folded like paper, drones disabled in seconds. A whisper across the comms made her jaw clench. "Dr. Reyes is still in that dome." Reyes sat cross-legged now, back to the inner wall, cubs tucked in close under each arm. His breathing was ragged. Not from panic, though, that too, but from pressure. His side felt like something was swelling inside it. He suspected the earlier impact had done more than bruise something. Internal bleed? Maybe. No time to confirm. He heard it before he saw it. The scrape of alloy against alloy, bulkhead doors shuddering open, metal groaning in protest. And then, silence. Then, a shadow, massive, slow-moving, deliberate. Korzun stepped through the dome's threshold like a nightmare born into daylight. Its hide shimmered with patches of dark, armored plating, scored by old plasma burns. Its eyes, two deep, liquid obsidian orbs, swept the dome like scanners. Muscle rippled beneath its shoulders. It paused. Reyes didn't move. Couldn't. The cubs, unbelievably, didn't flee. One whimpered. The other made a warbled, cooing sound and pressed closer to Reyes's chest. Korzun stopped walking. The dome fell utterly still. And then the impossible happened. The predator knelt. No growl, no roar, just a sound unlike any Reyes had ever heard, a rumbling, low-frequency whimper, a vocalization weighted not with threat, but grief. The cub stirred in his arms, and Korzun lowered its head to the floor. Reyes's heart hammered, his lips parted. He couldn't speak. Behind him, the dome lights flickered. Over comms, someone screamed to fire. He barely found his voice. "Stand down," he snapped. "Hold fire. Do not engage." No one replied. Then a second voice cracking, shocked filtered through. "Subject is non-hostile. Repeat. Korzun has ceased aggression." The cub slipped from his grip, slowly padding forward on uncertain paws. They reached the predator's snout. It exhaled. And Reyes exhaled with it, then slumped sideways, hand pressed to his ribs. His fingers came away red. The last thing he saw, before everything blurred, was Korzun curling its massive body around the cub's protective, still. Then darkness. They cut the biodome feed 10 minutes after Reyes collapsed. Not because of safety, Korzun had made no move beyond curling protectively around the cubs, but because no one knew what else to do. Surveillance teams debated in half-whispers, while surgical units waited on standby, unsure if the human inside was still alive. The feed went dark, replaced by emergency protocol overlays. By then, Reyes had already been airlifted to the medical wing. The shuttle had landed directly on the biodome's auxiliary roof panel, opened the sealed canopy with an emergency override, and extracted him using a Class 3 stasis rig normally reserved for shuttle crashes and deep vein evacuations. The cubs had growled when the rescue crew entered. Korzun had bared its teeth, but neither attacked. That fact haunted most of the Academy staff more than if they had. Reyes regained consciousness 16 hours later in the critical trauma unit, room 12, where the lights were low and the air hummed with quiet filtration. He knew the scent of sterile polymer too well by now. Even with his eyes closed, he could hear the cardiac monitor and the soft hiss of pain meds feeding into the port near his clavicle. A shape stirred near the corner of the room. "Don't sit up," said a voice. It was tired, clipped, not unkind. "Didn't plan on it," Reyes croaked. Supervisor Harnum stepped into view. She was holding a data slate, though she wasn't reading it. Her eyes, pale silver under lamplight, stayed locked on him. "You had a ruptured spleen," she said, like it was an accusation. "That sounds right," he muttered. His throat was dry. "You should have reported for imaging after the tree lurker incident." "Wasn't bleeding then." "You were. just not fast. He winced, not at the words, at the movement. Something pulled in his side, even through the meds. His abdomen felt like it had been cored and sewn back together by a sadist with a needle fetish. Which, to be fair, wasn't far from the truth. "How long?" he rasped. 3 hours in surgery. 3 units of blood. You've been under for almost a full day. You'll be in intensive care another week at least. She finally looked down at the slate. "Do you want the debrief now?" "Not particularly." That wasn't a real question. The footage replayed slowly. No sound, just visual logs. Reyes, huddled against the biodome wall, the cubs squirming beneath his arms, Korzun entering at full height, pausing, then kneeling. The tension visible in every frame, the twitch of the cub's ears, the slow curve of the predator's spine. It looked choreographed, like a scene from an old morality sim. "I didn't provoke it," Reyes said, after a long silence. "It didn't attack." "We know," Harnum said, "but we don't understand why." Reyes closed his eyes. The memory wasn't blurry. It was sharp, uncomfortably sharp. Every detail etched into his mind, the exact pitch of the cub's cries, the tension in the predator's jaw, the way his own pulse had drowned out everything else. "They're its offspring," he said finally. "I don't know how. I didn't know until that moment. You still withheld them from xenogenetics. Would they have survived if I hadn't? That's not the point. It is, to me." The lights buzzed faintly above them. "Listen," he added, voice rough. "I'm not saying what I did was right. I'm saying it worked. Korzun didn't attack because it saw them, and it saw me, with them." "Which raises other questions," Harnum said. She tapped the slate, projecting a hologram above the bed, genetic scans, cub profiles, fragments of Korzun's neural map. Reyes frowned. "That's from the pre-escape logs?" "No, that's from after. We perform new scans." He blinked. "Wait, Korzun submitted to scanning?" "Voluntarily. It followed the cubs into a modified enclosure. No restraints, no sedation. It hasn't made a single aggressive move in 37 hours. Reyes stared at the projection. Neural nodes were highlighted in blue, areas of heightened cognitive activity. "You see that?" Harnum asked, pointing. "Yeah, that's new. The recognition centers are overclocking." "Exactly. As if something rewired itself." He nodded slowly. "It imprinted," he murmured. "Impossible," Harnum replied. "Apparently not." 2 floors down, in a chamber repurposed from an atmospheric isolation lab, Korzun lay coiled beneath an artificial canopy of shade leaves, while the cubs dozed against its side. A single observation glass separated it from a panel of scientists and xenopsych specialists. Among them stood senior analyst Vren, a Tellarei who wore 2 translation nodes and an expression of pure disgust. "This is dangerous. That human didn't pacify it. He distracted it. No signs of relapse in over a day," argued Till, the junior cadet now promoted to field assistant. "The biometric scans show reduced adrenaline, consistent grooming behaviors, and no cortisol spikes during observation. It's an anomaly, not a breakthrough. An anomaly that held still for retinal mapping and shared a feeding basin with an entirely different species. You want to build a peace program on the back of one reckless mammal's emotional impulse? He saved the cubs, and maybe something more than that." Vren's voice dropped. "You're letting human sentimentality taint protocol." Till stared through the glass. The predator blinked slowly, eyes tracking the cubs even in sleep. "I think we're seeing something we weren't supposed to see." Vren's tendrils twitched with disdain. "Madness." Week 2 of recovery. Reyes had been moved to the supervised rehab ward, where he could walk slowly but still wasn't allowed caffeine, stairs, or anything sharper than a spoon. He hated the spoon rule most. Every day at 0800, a nurse named Marla checked his vitals, reviewed his food intake, and reminded him not to argue with the AI physio. Every day at 0815, he asked when he could see the cubs. And every day, the answer was the same. Not until psych clears it. By week 3, he got a different answer. "Report to enclosure B7, Marla said one morning, handing him a datapad and a fresh shirt. "Walk slowly, take breaks, don't make sudden movements when you enter." Reyes dressed faster than any man with 5 surgical staples should have. He took the lifts to the basement, passed the new security node, entered a wide chamber of reinforced polyglass and biosoft terrain. Korzun was there. It looked up when he stepped in, but it didn't rise. The cubs broke into a sprint. One launched directly into his lap, chirping wildly. The second tackled his shin. Reyes dropped to one knee with a grunt. "Hey, easy. I still have organs in here." Korzun approached, slow, deliberate, watching. He braced himself. Then something unexpected. It sat. The posture was calm, not submissive, not tense. Just present? Reyes met its gaze. No fear now. No panic. "Thanks for not killing me," he muttered. The predator blinked. And in that silence, the whole universe seemed to tilt. The official report took another month. It was reviewed, redacted, reviewed again. The final version called the incident a rare instance of behavioral cross-species imprinting, resulting in a complete override of prior combat conditioning in subject Korzun, likely catalyzed by familial recognition and reinforced through cohabitative trust modeling. The unofficial name of the incident? Reyes Folly, at least among the military staff. But the academic branches gave it a different title: Human Conflict Mediation and Trust Reprogramming Pilot Study 1. And they asked Reyes to lead it. He didn't say yes immediately. He spent 5 weeks debating it, but the choice was obvious in the end. Especially when he stood again in that enclosure, one hand on a cub's back, the other pressing a field slate to record Korzun's low vocalizations. It wasn't madness, not entirely. It was something else. Maybe even hope. By the 7th week of recovery, Dr. Nathan Reyes had finally weaned off the last of the painkillers, though his gait still carried the stiffness of someone who remembered the worst of it. His abdomen ached with certain motions, and his sleep was still interrupted by phantom pressure under the ribs. But the medical clearance came through, conservative but definitive. Physically stable, medically functional, no unrestricted exertion for 2 more weeks. He was ready to work again. And the academy was bracing for war. Not with weapons or fleets, but paperwork, philosophy, and what Reyes privately referred to as sanitized panic. Half the xenobehavioral department was calling for a complete moratorium on predator-class species research. The other half wanted to double funding for empathy-based conditioning studies, whatever that meant. The ethics board convened twice daily. The media, especially the Outer Rim broadcasters, called the incident everything from a hoax to proof of human telepathic manipulation. Which was nonsense, obviously. He wasn't psychic, just there, at the right time, in the wrong way. And now the consequences were spreading like spores in humidity. "I'm not saying it isn't unprecedented," said Director Vorn, a towering Eryx with polished carapace ridges and a fondness for worst-case scenarios. "I'm saying it's unacceptable precedent." Reyes sat across from him in the executive review chamber, his posture upright but guarded. He'd been summoned with less than an hour's notice, which felt symbolic. "You're suggesting I should have let the cubs die." "I'm suggesting you shouldn't have brought an Apex-class juvenile into an academic setting without declaration or review, that you interfered with a known bioengineered predator's behavioral suppression program, that you were reckless, impulsive, and alive," Reyes cut in. "So were the cubs, and now so is Korzun, which, by the way, hasn't shown a single aggressive behavior in over 5 weeks. Until it does." "Director." "No, Dr. Reyes." Vorn's voice deepened. "You've compromised the chain of safety and scientific discipline. This is not a rehabilitation clinic. This is Zalith Interstellar Academy. We do not gamble with 10-ton biological weapons." Reyes inhaled through his nose, then exhaled slowly. "I didn't gamble," I responded. "To what?" "To something none of you wanted to see." Vorn tilted his head. "And what was that?" Reyes stood, slowly, his side still twinged, but the words came easier now. Clearer? "That maybe survival isn't the only thing that matters. Maybe connection is. And maybe if we're terrified of the idea that a creature like Korzun can bond with someone like me, then we're not afraid of the predator. We're afraid of being wrong about it." Vorn said nothing, but Reyes could feel the weight of it: judgment without fury, logic without grace. "Your program is under review," the director said at last. "The board will vote within 2 cycles." Reyes left the chamber with his fists clenched and a fire in his chest that painkillers had never touched. He returned to the enclosure that evening, alone, with a monitor strapped across his wrist and 2 layers of clearance logged on the inner doors. The cubs met him halfway, tripping over each other in their enthusiasm. Korzun watched from its usual resting space, head raised, eyes bright. "Hey," Reyes said softly. "Rough day. You too, huh?" He sank to the floor. The cubs circled him, then nestled into his sides like they belonged there. Korzun rose one slow movement at a time, then padded closer. Reyes watched it lower its massive frame beside him, inches away. The smell of earth and scaled musk filled the enclosure. A low breath moved through the predator's nostrils. Then so soft it was nearly missed a sound, one that Reyes had come to catalog in private notes. Not a whimper, not a growl, but something closer to resonance. Communication. A vocal form without lexicon. He answered with his own voice, quiet but steady. "Still with me?" Korzun blinked once, then closed its eyes. At 0300 hours, a coded message pinged his private comms line. From Harnum. Subject: Incoming vote. Majority leaning no, recommend you prepare counter. Will update when confirmed. Reyes stared at the message, then tapped back. Noted. He didn't sleep that night. By mid-morning, the academic forum was full. Not just staff. Attending species from the outer colonies tuned in through synaptic uplinks. Representatives from 6 galactic research groups had observers present. One faction, the Jern-Call delegation, had even sent an ambassador to argue that predator-class organisms should be immediately culled after capture, regardless of age. "No apex threat is ever truly dormant," said the ambassador, coldly. "That is not ideology. That is pattern recognition across 17 extinction-class events." "They were engineered," Reyes said from his seat at the center table. "What happened to them wasn't their choice, but how we respond to them now is." "Human emotionality is not a countermeasure," Vorn said, "nor is it science. I'm not asking for compassion. I'm asking for observation. Give me 6 more months. Let us see how the behavior holds. If the aggression returns, I'll be the first to report it." Harnum, who stood at the periphery, remained silent, watching, neutral on the surface, but her fingers twitched against her data pad. The room turned quiet. Then one of the junior Xenosic researchers, a thin, spiraled brain, Gelani, named Mora, spoke. "We've tried everything else. Shock, sedation, isolative reprogramming. All of it fails eventually. This hasn't. Not yet. You want to test a theory based on nurture?" "I want to acknowledge what happened," Mora said, "and study it." That tipped the scales. Not fully, but enough. The final vote came down 9-6. Reyes's program would continue. Provisional status, heavy oversight, 6 months. 2 weeks later, the Academy quietly began construction on a new habitat wing, a naturalistic enclosure with environmental stimulation calibrated for apex recuperation, social bonding trials, and cross-species enrichment protocols. It didn't have a name at first, just a project code. But the team started calling it Reyes's Folly anyway. He didn't mind. Especially when he was given full access, not just observation, full participation. The kind of research autonomy no one at Xalith got outside of legacy scientists or species founders. The cubs thrived. Korzun stabilized. And the logs showed something no one had predicted: mimicry. The adult predator began copying small motions from Reyes during visits, head tilts, breathing patterns, even hand gestures. It didn't understand them, but it echoed them. Not perfectly, but deliberately. On the 95th day after the incident, Reyes received an unannounced visitor in his lab. The Telleri analyst Vren stepped inside without preamble, his expression unreadable. "You're being cited in 2 major off-world behavioral journals," he said, almost grudgingly. Reyes didn't look up from his data scroll. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a notification." "I'll take it." Vren exhaled sharply through his vent slits. "I still believe you endangered everyone in this facility. I believe I saved 3 lives. And possibly set an ethical precedent that will haunt us all." Reyes finally looked up. "If we're haunted by the idea that a predator can be something other than violent, maybe that says more about us than it does about them." Vren said nothing. But he didn't argue. And when he left, Reyes almost smiled. That night, as the Academy lights dimmed and biodome shadows stretched long across the enclosure, Reyes leaned against the inner barrier and watched the cubs tumble over each other in mock combat. Corzun lounged nearby, tail flicking, eyes half-lidded. The stars above the dome shimmered with filtered precision, programmed constellations designed to mimic 7 local systems. He didn't know if the cubs recognized them. But they were safe. For now. And sometimes, Reyes thought, that was enough. 5 months after the containment breach that nearly evacuated Zalith Interstellar Academy, Dr. Nathan Reyes stood in front of a packed delegation chamber, not with evidence of failure, but something much more dangerous to an academic institution built on cautioned success. The room was round, tiered, its center platform bathed in soft white light. Arrayed in semicircular rows were representatives from 16 research departments, 4 military oversight branches, and 2 intergalactic policy councils. Reyes could feel their eyes on him like pressure valves, ready to burst. Behind him, a large display scrolled slowly through recorded footage. Corzun lying curled around its cubs, the apex predator stepping aside to let Reyes enter its enclosure without resistance. Biometric graphs showing consistently low aggression markers. A final chart displayed the most recent neural scans, subtle but significant rewiring in the emotion processing regions of the predator's brain. He didn't need to explain most of it. The data spoke for itself. But still, they expected him to say something more than numbers. So he did. "I won't waste your time with speculation," he began. "You've all seen the results. You've seen that Corzun hasn't shown a single spike in hostile behavior in 148 days. You've seen how the cubs have bonded, not just with the adult, but with me and other caretakers as well." He let that sink in, then continued. "What you haven't seen is what happened yesterday." He tapped his slate. A new clip played. The room fell silent. The footage showed Corzun inside the enclosure, crouched beside one of the cubs. A researcher xenoecologist Dev Gorman was inside the habitat, clearly nervous. His posture rigid, his eyes fixed on the predator. In his hands was a feeding basin. He tripped slightly, caught his footing, then winced as a cub squealed. A sharp sound, high-pitched. Corzun rose instantly. The audience tensed as the predator stepped forward, towering, casting Gorman in shadow. Then it stopped. It lowered its head, and gently nudged the cub toward him. That was all, just that. The video ended, the lights returned. Reyes stepped forward. "We didn't sedate it, we didn't condition it, we didn't shock it into passivity. We gave it back its family, we gave it trust, and in return, it gave us something no algorithm predicted." The last sentence hung in the air, like vapor in cold light. Then he nodded once, stepped back, and said no more. He didn't have to. The trust protocol was approved unanimously by the council 48 hours later. It wasn't a full expansion. Not yet too many eyes were watching. Too many variables still uncertain, but it formalized what Reyes had already been doing. It gave him authority, structure, resources. It gave him a future with his program. He was appointed director of the newly minted Human Conflict Mediation and Trust Reprogramming Division. He asked them to drop "human" from the title. They didn't. He let it go. Because now he could choose his own staff. Because now he could authorize the construction of a second enclosure. And because now, finally, he could stop fighting to keep something alive and start building something that could last. The cubs were growing fast. By the 6th month, they were the size of small jungle cats, leaner, more coordinated. Their claws had hardened, their reflexes sharper. But they still slept with their snouts tucked against Reyes's leg when he sat still long enough. Corzun had taken to vocalizing in what Reyes dubbed low comfort tones whenever he approached the habitat. Not always, but more often than not. The sounds varied slightly depending on the cub's position or whether Reyes was carrying anything. None of it had formal translation. But it meant something. It was something. One morning, while logging the adult's biometrics, he noticed that Corzun had repositioned its nest, if you could call it that. A crescent of padded foliage and heated stones, always kept between the center of the enclosure and the observation window. Strategically chosen, a midpoint, a signal. Reyes stood there for nearly 10 minutes before realizing what it reminded him of. A threshold. An invitation. Till, the Sorkian cadet who'd watched the breach unfold from the command deck, joined Reyes's team full-time by month 7. Her analytical approach was sharper than most of the PhDs he'd worked with, and she had the one trait Reyes valued above all else in his chaotic corner of science: a refusal to pretend certainty. She met him near the primary habitat one evening, both of them watching the predators sleep. "They don't see you as one of them," she said, arms folded. "No," Reyes agreed. "They see me as something else." "Safe? Maybe. Or maybe just consistent." She glanced at him. "You really think this can scale? Not with every species, not with every case, but with some? Yeah, I do." Till's pupils narrowed. "The Irix military is watching. They're looking for a reason to shut us down." "I know. They're saying this kind of bond only proves Corzun is manipulating us, holding back." Reyes shrugged. "Maybe it is, but for 6 months, it's chosen not to harm a single living thing, even when it had chances." Till nodded. Then, quietly, "That scares them more than an attack would." Not all consequences arrived in meetings. Some came quietly, personally. Harnum visited his office near the end of month 8. She hadn't spoken to him much since the vote neutral as ever, but withdrawn. She stepped in without speaking, studied the diagrams pinned along his wall. "You look tired," she said. "I still don't sleep right." "Same." She turned, looked him in the eye. "I want a transfer. Full assignment. Here." Reyes blinked. "You sure?" "Watching that thing break out of a Class 4 wing, I thought I knew what would happen. I thought I was watching the beginning of a massacre, and instead I watched it stop. Because of you." Reyes didn't smile. He just nodded. Once. Then handed her the onboarding tablet. At exactly the 9-month mark, Reyes stepped into the enclosure alone. No gloves, no field gear, no observers. Just him. The cubs rushed him immediately, of course, sending a brief jolt of pain through his healing abdomen when one slammed into his hip. He grunted, laughed once, steadied himself. Then looked up. Corzun stood 20 feet away, watching. He didn't move. Neither did it. Then the predator carefully, almost regally lowered its body, forearms tucked, tail relaxed. Its posture was non-aggressive, non-defensive, simply open. Reyes walked the distance slowly. Stopped 5 feet away. Corzun tilted its head. He lifted his hand, held it out, palm up. And then, unbelievably, the apex predator that had once slaughtered armored battalions with its bare claws nudged its snout into his palm. Not in submission. In trust. In the final report he submitted to the Galactic Ethics Board at the 1-year anniversary of the breach, Reyes didn't focus on the neurodata. He didn't focus on the chemical markers, or the enclosure schematics, or the aggressive behavior index charts. He wrote this: "We assumed violence is the default of the predator. But what if survival made them violent? What if the first moment of real safety was the first moment of real change? What if we didn't have to win their fear to earn their peace?" No one objected. Not officially. On the first night of the second winter cycle, the Academy quietly updated its public exhibits. Among the holodisplays of known sentient species, a new section was added under Experimental Cohabitation Initiatives. The title was simple: The Trust Protocol, Human-Led Behavioral Mediation Studies. Reyes didn't attend the ceremony. He was in the enclosure, watching the cubs chase each other through mist-covered terrain, Corzun resting beside the stream, eyes half closed, content. He sat on a rock, sipped terrible recycled coffee, and smiled faintly to himself. No one would ever fully understand what had happened that day in the biodome. But they remembered what didn't happen. The massacre that never came. Because a predator had seen its young in the arms of something it didn't recognize, and chose not to destroy it. Because something in that moment had rewritten both of them. Not with domination, but with recognition. And somewhere in that space between instinct and choice was the shape of trust.